take your seats, please.
So we shouldn't stand up to talk because we'll be out of
The camera will miss us.
So we have the panel discussion here. I'm going to ask Richard Barrett to introduce the members of the panel. We've added a couple people beyond the speakers, and then we're blessed to have Dr. Vicki Pappas serving as the moderator of the panel. So, Richard?
Well, he's calling this a panel discussion, but I feel like I'm just at a table of some of my dearest friends. We've all known each other and worked together in one form or another for years at this point. To my right is John Michael Boyer, Protopsaltis of the Greek Orthodox metropolis of San Francisco. To his right, Father Romanos Karanos, professor of Byzantine music at Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology. To his right, Amy Hogg, my co-host in our Byzantine Chant podcast, A Sacrifice of Praise, as well as one of the Chanters at St. George Cathedral in Pittsburgh. To her right, Sarah Roumas, presently not quite a doctoral candidate, but a doctoral student at Notre Dame University, and we both got our certificates at the same time, our Byzantine Chant Performer certificates. And then I'm Richard Barrett. I'm the Executive Director of Ages Initiatives. And then we have the good fortune today of being moderated by Dr. Vicki Pappas.
Is everybody able to hear in the back?
Is there any microphone?
Give them the wireless mic, yes. The wireless mic will be cutting in and out the whole time. We'll try it if you'd like, but for now, go ahead and begin.
No,
That's for the online. Yeah. And this is for the podcast.
okay. Well, we received a few questions that we thought we might start out with, and then we have some other questions. I can't, if I stand up, Peter, we're out
The
of
camera
the
will
camera.
lose us.
We have some other questions that will lead to some interchanges between you as the participants and us as the panel. So we'll handle the very specific questions first. And one of the first questions was asking for some resources that might help in the use of the psalm verses. What resources are available in Greek and English that chanters in large, or choirs in large parishes can sing as the people are receiving communion. So who would like to handle that?
I'll start.
Okay.
In general, I apply a hierarchy of options for that particular liturgical moment. The communion of the faithful after metaphobetheu, with the fear of God, faith, and love draw near. One is to continue singing a setting of the communion verse, the appointed communion verse. Now, this is assuming that you are singing a traditional setting of the communion verse, which is a long melismatic piece, and it's designed to cover that long liturgical action. And we were just actually over lunch discussing what they do at my favorite parish in Greece, St. Irene's on Eolu Street in Athens.
Mine too.
Where my late teacher, Angelopoulos, chanted for many years. What they do now is, during the chanting of the communion verse, often they won't get to the end of it by the time the priest is done. And so they keep an eye out for when the clergy come out of the holy doors to say, with the fear of God, metaphobetheu. And what they do is they continue to chant, but they essentially lower the volume down to where it's basically a stage whisper, and you hear the exclamation of the deacon come out over the music with the fear of God. And then once that's done, and the reader from the right choir will exclaim, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord is God and has appeared to us." And then once all that's done, the volume of the communion verse raises back up to its normal level and continues. It's actually a fantastic moment, just aesthetically and every other way. If you're not doing a long melismatic communion verse, then one thing is to do whatever setting of that communion verse that you're doing before, as a refrain to psalm verses taken from the psalm from which the communion verse is taken. Right? So on most Sundays, that's Psalm 148. Right? And so you start with, praise the Lord from the heavens, praise him in the highest, alleluia, praise him, all his angels, praise him, all his hosts, alleluia, praise him, O sun and moon, praise him, all you stars and lights, and you can use your communion verse, your short version of praise the Lord or Enite ton Kyrion as a refrain for that psalm. If you don't want to do that, or you end up going through the entire psalm and you still need more time, if you have like 1,000 people communing, then choosing another melismatic communion verse, kinonikon, either another setting of the same one, or if you look in older Typica, if there's a feasted saint celebrated on a Sunday, you also get to sing the communion verse for that saint. So you can start with the one for a Sunday, praise the Lord from the heavens, and then go to an everlasting remembrance shall the righteous be, or whatever the communion verse for the saint would be. And if you don't have melismatic settings of that, then you can apply the same process that you did for the first psalm. So you take that psalm and use that psalm verse as a refrain for that psalm. If you don't have that, or you don't want to do that, then the next down the ladder of hierarchy, at least in the way I think of it, is other liturgical psalms that you might feel appropriate. Psalms get sort of primacy of place at this point. And then after that, and so, you hear a lot of people sing the Polieleos Doulikirion or Exomologista to Kyrio, give thanks unto the Lord for he is good. But psalms usually are the primacy of place. Of course, then there's the other practice of singing the Troparion to Dipnus to Mystiku, receive me today, O Son of God, as a partaker of your mystical supper. That it is a practice that people do, and I don't think it's bad. It's just not what's appointed for that moment. So there are a number of things that you can do, and I think it's just a matter of having those options in your back pocket to pull out when necessary.
Some people do Agni Partene.
No.
Okay.
The question.
Yes, so the question is, some people do Agni Parthene, is that okay? No, it is not okay to do anything paraliturgical at that most sacred moment of the liturgy.
Thank you.
It has to be liturgical. Agni Parthene is fine for Antidoron or some other occasion, but not during the communion. Just to add to John's comments, there's also the Eucharistic Psalm par excellence, which is Psalm 33. Ευλογήσω τον Κύριον εν παντή καιρό, I will bless the Lord at all times, which has the verse γεύσαστε και είδετε ότι Χριστός ο Κύριος, taste and see that the Lord is good, Christos with an ita, not Christos with a iota. This was in all likelihood the most ancient kinonikon, and it was chanted like John said. So the cantor would recite all the verses of the psalm, and then the choir or the congregation would repeat the refrain, that verse, taste and see that the Lord is good. So we can do that also. And in terms of resources, for the Greek, for the long melismatic pieces, of course, we can look at the old collections, the Anthologia, the Papadiki, things like Musiki Sylogi by a Constantinopolitan cantor named Georgios Progakis. And also recently, the late Father Konstantinos Papagiannis from Thessaloniki composed short syllabic settings of various kinonika. The thing is, all that is in Greek. I'm not sure about English resources. Richard?
So there are some English scores for a number of these things. In terms of long melismatic settings, Gabriel Cremines has a number of them at this point. John, you have one or two.
Well, Nick Roumas also.
Nick Roumas, in his recently published book, The Musical Ark. In terms of syllabic settings of psalms in English, again, John, you have one or two.
Couple, I think.
You have first mode and
Plagal fourth.
Plagal fourth for Praise the Lord from the Heavens. A number of these scores are also up on ages in staff notation. John's scores are binotational, I believe. And then there's some other various scores floating around out there for syllabic psalms, but those are the main sources at this point, I would say, for English.
Just a commentary to the group. This occurred to me, being a choir member, this might be a nice vehicle for collaborating closer between choirs and chanters. I think what choirs tend to do is they'll do tu lipnusu, tu mystiku. What I find sometimes, what I call bad practice, is they'll take communion hymns they like, but they're appointed for certain feasts, and they're singing them really at the wrong time. And they seem limited in their resources as well. And it seems, I wondered if there are any parishes represented here where with the verses and the refrains, as John was describing, is any of that done between chanters doing the verses and choirs doing the refrains? Are there any experiences like that, or do you think that would work in your parishes?
The Annunciation Church in Cranston, Rhode Island, does that during communion often.
Annunciation Church in Cranston, Rhode Island does that. Anybody else? Do you think that would work in your parishes?
Sounds nice. Sounds really nice.
Be nice. Might be something to try. Okay, that was the first question, and then another one was a specific question. Should we try to match the mode or scale of Tintimioteran Megalinaria with that of the Katavasias? And the example is the Sunday after Theophany has mode 2 on the, is that right? The Stevie Thalassies. Should ode 9 be soft or hard chromatic? And are the chanters allowed personal preference on that? Anybody want to tackle that one?
Any of you want to take this?
Father, go ahead.
Well, yes. Yes, Father.
Are we allowed to sing the Megalinario every day?
Okay, another question.
Oh, that's another, yes,
Another
yes,
question.
that's another question. Okay. You mean during liturgy?
Yes, so communion, because that was.
Oh, it
Or during communion?
That's what choirs
Mm.
do too.
Well, I mean, the Megalinarium is not thematically related to communion at all, so it does not really make sense to sing an Apolitikion or a Megalinarium or anything like, or a Doxastikon. It really should be something that calls the people to partake of the body and blood of Christ. So in my opinion, no. Now back to this question. Yes, of course we should try to match the mode of what comes next. Now the question is, do we only sing the Katavasia after Tintimioteran or not? According to the strict application of the rubrics, we chant the 9th ode of the canon. And if we chant the resurrectional canon of the Sunday, then we should do Tintimioteran in the mode of the Sunday, because the canon that will follow will be in that mode. So if this is the practice we follow, then we should be singing Tintimioteran in the mode of the week. So different mode every Sunday. If we don't, and we go straight to the Katavasia, then yes, I mean, if it's, for example, this coming Sunday, the Katavasia will be in the 3rd mode. Tintimioteran should also be in the 3rd mode. There's also the extra conservative side, which maybe 1% of cantors in the world follow, which is to always sing Tintimioteran in Plagal 2nd, because that is the original mode. The text Tintimioteran, τον Χερουβίμ και Ενδοξωτέραν, etc., is the Irmos of the 9th ode of the Holy Friday canon. So it is chanted in the Plagal 2nd mode in the Passion service. It's a poem by Saint Cosmas, the hymnographer. But that's a super conservative practice that I don't think a lot of people follow. Was there another part to the question that I
No,
missed?
oh, yeah, Stevie.
Stevie
You're asking about
Thalassis.
Vivu, hard chromatic, soft chromatic, Stevie Thalassis.
Ah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a 2-hour-long lecture I give in an advanced class of Byzantine music about the consubstantiality of the chromatic genus, but I'm not I'm not sure that there's a time and place for that. Stevie Thalasis is, to answer the specific question, the verses should be hard chromatic, την τιμιωτέραν should be hard chromatic, and Stevie Thalasis soft chromatic. So the person who asked, I think, understands my response.
Okay.
Which is exactly what we get with the Megalinaria on the
Okay.
second.
Another question, but it might expand a little bit too, is when you have more than one chanter in a church, what suggestions might there be for practicing as a group so that you get the most beautiful sound, and expanding that a little so we can include some of the same issues that choirs face is how do we help church musicians, whether they be chanters or choir members, to recognize that beauty in what they're doing is an important aspiration, instead of a more casual approach where we don't need to come to rehearsals, we don't need to rehearse together. It's okay if we come a little late. It's okay if we don't have the right, tones that we're using. So looking at that question through the mirror of promoting excellence in our work.
I'll just say one thing, and then I'll leave it to others to discuss the specifics. Both Cain and Abel offered sacrifice to God, but only one of them found favor. One sacrifice was lazy, the other one was not. So the sacrifice that was pleasing to God was Abel's sacrifice. So when we come to chant or when we do anything in church, it's really an offering. It's not a privilege. It's not something that we have a right to do. It's something that we are offering to God, and therefore it should be as good as possible. And rehearsal is part of that. So now, that's, I don't know who wants to.
I had a position for about 1.5 years where I was director of music at a cathedral and leading both, and I say both chanting and the choir, but it was all the same group of people. And I felt very lucky and blessed because we had weekly rehearsals, and the attendance at those rehearsals was firm and regular. And if anybody didn't show up to rehearsal, everybody said, well, where's so-and-so tonight? That's weird. That person's always here. How many people in the room are choir directors or lead the program at their respective parish? So a few of you. And I've gotten this question from a number of people in the past. What can I do to get people to come to rehearsal? And there are a number of approaches. One of which is guilt, which honestly, in my experience, I really wish it worked, but it doesn't really, because all it does is create a negative association with the whole endeavor, right? I feel guilty, but how many people run toward things that make them feel guilty? Very few, right? So in my experience, the best way to get people to come to rehearsal and to keep coming to rehearsal is that you have to make their time worthwhile while they're there. And the way I do that is that I'm constantly challenging them. I'm constantly putting something in front of them that's just slightly out of their reach so that they want to come back the next week and learn it. And that's also how you get choirs to get better and better. It breaks my heart every time I hear a choir director or member saying, oh, we don't rehearse, we know the liturgy. No, you don't. No, you don't. Because you don't know the next liturgy. Every liturgy is different. Every liturgy, as I said in my talk, happens in that moment, once, right? And is connected to the eternal liturgy in heaven. But unless other people have spiritual gifts that are far and away better than most of the people I know, they're not necessarily connected to that continual liturgy in heaven all the time, right? So it's something that keep them engaged, keep them challenged, keep them interested, and I think this also holds true for working with younger people and children, which I know Amy can talk a little bit more about as well.
So I would like to say that in order to rehearse, people need the music. I started.
Well, yeah.
I mean, with ages, you don't have that issue as much. But I started chanting at St. George Cathedral about 6 years ago, and I had no idea where they were getting the music from. And finally, they, sent me some emails, and I printed stuff off. But once I printed all of Vespers off, I had the music, and I could practice it. Now we've moved to using tablets, and so our Protosaltis has put all of the Vespers and Orthros music for the mode together, so we have a document, and all of the Katavasia are with their Timiotera that goes with it, and so I think that's something that really helps make it easier for people to practice, because most new choir members have no idea where to pull music from, and there's multiple sources for everything. So by making the music easily available for your specific parish, that's also very helpful.
So sometimes our liturgical traditions are referred to with the kind of umbrella title of holy chaos. Right? And there are times when cantors perhaps cultivate the sense of chaos. And there was one time when somebody said to me after a service, I don't get what you guys are doing. You guys are all kind of just standing in a clump, you're following one score, you're just all singing really loudly, you don't blend, we can't make out the words. What's going on there? Now we can sort of have a discussion about how well-meaning or not the person asking this question was being, but there perhaps is a point there that a lot of us just frankly are used to singing on our own. Well, a lot of us are used to being the only person who can get through a service at a particular parish. And so when we have to sing with other people, we just do what we do normally, just there's another person standing next to us. And this gets me to something that I heard a lot growing up, which is that the first rule of being a musician is you have to play with people who are better than you. And that's how you get better. And a lot of us, I think, don't have that opportunity all that often. So we don't wind up having to worry about or even think about issues like blend, vowel matching, singing in tune with one another, heaven forbid. And so when we do come together as a group, our instincts aren't helping us very much. Hopefully our instincts all help us a little better tonight. I think this group of people will be able to handle that. But there has to be a sense that that when you are singing with an ensemble, you do something a little differently than you do as a soloist, and that there's a tangible result in doing so. That there is a beautiful result. That it's worth putting some time into. And if there is, my experience with rehearsal is that if people feel like there's a benefit to rehearsal, they will come. If they don't, they won't.
Right.
One of the concerns, I guess, that are sometimes raised when the thought of becoming a chanter occurs to people is it sounds very mysterious and hard and difficult, and so you don't get people wanting to learn how to chant. And I've thought of that with response to the third question area that we have, is the question of how do you actually teach Byzantine chant to people who would like to learn? Would you start with the paralegi and notation, or should you just have people learning the modes by ear? So I thought this might be a chance for you guys to Amy, you ladies.
In general, I like to teach the way we learn language. So, you know, babies are born into a family, they hear music, or they hear their parents talk to you.
And they hear music.
You know, so hopefully in your, you know, a new chanter has been hearing Byzantine chant, and so they've already, you know, went through that period of immersion. But if not, then they need to have lots of recordings that they're listening to. And then generally, I only want to teach someone to read once they've gone through some, basically kind of like phonemic awareness. So with young children in kindergarten, they play lots of rhyming games, they do lots of things to develop their understanding of sound. And that is a really important prerequisite to being able to read. And so I think that in order to teach people to read Byzantine notation or Western notation, you really have to develop ear training, and along with that is some modal theory, so that you understand what you're hearing. So that's generally the approach I take, and yes, that involves paralogy. I think it should involve learning things by memory, you know, learning melodies, learning hymns, on paralogy, on melos, so that you're developing that stuff kind of naturally, internally, and then you start reading it. So I think it should model, or it should follow the language learning model.
Sarah, how do you?
I guess my approach has generally been, most of the people that I work with are doctoral students. That happens to be the kind of people that I'm around most often. And they tend to get very, very nervous when they don't have something on paper that they can look at. And I understand that because I'm like that myself. I guess what I focus on I think Amy and I are really going in the same direction here. The way I think about it is remembering that the music that is on the page functions as a mnemonic device. That it is there to remind us of something that we already know. It's not there to impart to us some new knowledge that we don't already have. So I do always work with music because otherwise people freeze up. But I do tend to keep this mnemonic device at the very forefront of what I'm doing.
And just to, as an addition to that, we should always remember that the Celtic art is primarily an oral tradition, oral and oral with O and AU, and secondarily a written tradition. Yes, there is this very sophisticated form of notation that has a 1,000-year-old history, but the main way cantors were trained was by listening to their teacher and by going to the chant stand and memorizing the theses and the melodies. So the notation is a helpful device, like Sarah said, to help you recall to memory what you've already learned. And of course, most of us in the States do not have the privilege of having grown up around accomplished cantors singing Byzantine music well all our life, right? But at least now we have YouTube, we have all sorts of recordings. So that problem has been addressed by technology.
Paralogy is life.
1,000 times paralogy.
1,000 times paralogy.
One
yeah.
time melos.
Yeah.
We heard this morning,
Vicki,
oh, I'm
Leonidas,
sorry,
I think
is there a
has
question?
follow-up question? On
Yes.
Anyone that's heard any recordings of Pappas or Stanitas, you hear these high-pitched voices doing the Karanos. Those are young boys who are standing up around.
Did you hear it?
How practical is that to revive that? In some parts of Greece, it's just instead of boys going to the altar, standing around.
Did you hear the question? Repeat the question too.
The comment was that when you listen to old recordings of Pringus Stanicas from the Patriarchate, you hear these high voices doing the kanonarchisma, which is the lining out of the text before it's chanted. And those are boys that are learning, and so they're there at the Chanter Center from a very young age, doing this practice of the kanonarchisma. It's actually really a cool effect if you find some of those recordings online. I think that would be wonderful if we could start incorporating that, especially in this country. And one of the biggest advantages of that is that if you start out doing that, so primarily holding ison and doing kanonarchisma, then you become completely familiarized with the liturgical texts, right? And so that by the time you're getting to the point where you're chanting these texts, you've already recited them so many times by lining it out for the chanter. I think the most challenging thing is getting kids to overcome their stage fright and embarrassment of being able to do that. But if you get them started at, God forgive me, but at Vespers where nobody shows up anyway, then that might be a good way to start.
What service now?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Mark Sultani. This is actually my question, and I forgot to add a part to the end of it. So, I have some young people who come up to the chanter stand with me at Orthodox, and oftentimes, if I'm chanting something, they're just standing there. I try to encourage them to sing along. They don't read the notation. They also don't know how to hold ison. Would you recommend trying to teach them to hold ison?
Yes.
I learned kind of in an informal slipshod way, just pick things up from people here and there. And at one point, somebody was like, yeah, this is how you read the ison and the Byzantine notation. I was like, oh, okay. So I started doing that before I learned the notation. So you would agree that that's a good way to
You know the symbols?
I don't know those yet.
All right. Can we do this real quick?
All right. Ni, pa, vu, ga, di, ke, zo flat.
Nice.
So, na, ye, fan, ro, see, immediately. So if as long as the person who's leading it can it knows where they want the ison to change, and you teach people just that, right? They learn the paralayi, and they learn to follow you, very, very important. And learning to sing ison means learning to sing in tune, which is a foundation.
Can you show that again? Because
Yeah.
you stood up.
I stood up out of camera. Hi, everybody out there on the interwebs. So ni, pa, vu, ga, di, ke, zo flat. I didn't want to give motus there. This is a system actually developed by Yorgos Bilalis that I learned from Stelios Kotakiotis, and then passed on the gospel of Isokratimas signals to the community at Holy Cross in Boston. So.
We started flashcards, so this is better.
Yeah. Okay, we heard this morning Father Romanos explaining to us some of the functions, the longer compositions needed to coordinate with the role of the priest. What happens, however, is for people who don't know that, what either the chanters are doing in the order of service or the choirs, is they raise the criticism, and some clergy do this, that it's too much of a performance, too performance-oriented. And why do we have to have these long things that we don't even understand, and you're just going on and on and on, or the choir is singing in 4 and 5 different parts, and it's too long, it's making the service too long. I think church musicians don't understand performance in the same way, because we know that we're always working on performance, but it's taken on a bad connotation both for choirs and chanters, that they're too into performing and they're taking away from the text. And they're taking away from our experience of the liturgy. So how do we get over this hump? Again, knowing what we should be doing, and yet there is this criticism, sometimes maybe rightly so, of the performance element superseding the text and the process of what's going on in the liturgy. So I wondered what your thoughts were on that.
A lot of thoughts on
Yeah, I'll just say a couple of things. For people who raise these criticisms, come to these workshops.
Yes.
I mean, this is a
It's
way
needed.
to,
Oh, yeah.
to teach people. As far as the performance component is concerned, the moment chanting or singing or whatever the case may be draws attention to the singer, to the performer, then something is wrong. So yes, there is a danger of liturgical singing devolving into performance in that bad sense. That does not mean that we should take away from the beauty of the singing. But there have been moments when I'm liturgizing and I hear a cantor doing this beautiful fermata on a high note, for example, and I do that also as a cantor sometimes, right? And at that moment, I get distracted from reading the prayers, and my mind goes to the music, and I'm, oh, this was nice. Okay, this was nice, but it really did not serve its liturgical function. So, in my opinion, the best way to deal with this problem is to simply follow the tradition, which is you sing from musical scores, do not deviate from the scores, do all the choral parts chorally, and reserve those high moments where they're that call for some soloistic embellishment. You know, for example, the Agios Athanatos in the Trisagion, there are some high points in the Kinonikon that can be done by a soloist. So as long as you do not overdo it, I think there is no problem. I don't know what others have to say.
John.
I think it's important to reorient ourselves as to what it is that we do in church to begin with. And that was part of what I was trying to get at with my talk. But if something that the chanter is doing, the chanter, the choir, a soloist, the group, is quote-unquote distracting, you have to ask yourself, what is it distracting you from? Because most of us are not the priest in the altar reading priest's prayers. We are in the congregation experiencing the liturgy. And what the choir is singing, what the chanters are singing at any given moment, that is what the liturgy is. So if you are being distracted by that, from something else, the something else is the distraction. We do not come to church for our own personal prayers. We come to church for the communal corporate prayer of the Eucharistic assembly. So if you're busy praying about something that's bothering you personally, in your own life, a loved one comes to mind or anything, that's fine as it sort of comes to your mind and you incorporate that into your liturgical experience, but that's not the focus of why you're there. And I would even say, and I've heard this from a number of very both scholarly and very faithful priests that I've worked with in the past, on a particular level, we don't come to church to pray in that sense. We come to church to praise and to worship. And those are different things. Okay.
Wow. Oh, I'm sorry. John, talk a little more about that, because so often I hear from choir members, and I would guess that chanters feel the same way, that we're so busy with our role that when we're singing or chanting, we're not praying as fully as we could, as if we're just a congregational. And what you just said seems to turn that all the way around. So I wondered if you'd talk a little more about it.
Sure, this is actually something that I love addressing because it's one of these things that, just as you said, Vicki, you kind of have to turn it on its head. If you're a chanter, a member of a choir, you are fulfilling a liturgical function. And that liturgical function is in support of the worship of the Eucharistic community, in support of the worship of the whole assembly, the whole community. Once you start thinking, am I praying hard enough, well enough, piously enough? Am I, really concentrating on this? Am I really being as prayerful as I should be? How come I don't feel like I'm praying as much as I would otherwise? You've already lost.
Yep.
Because in that moment, you have one job. You had one job. You have one job, which is to assist in leading the community in the corporate worship. Again, it's not about your own personal prayer. And so often I enjoy going to other places where I don't have to chant. Because I can just stand in the community and let somebody else do the work and participate in that manner. Unfortunately, very rarely happens anymore. But it's, and so that's why I love going to the monasteries, because very rarely they will ask me to chant, but then the cat got out of the bag and they started asking me to chant. But anyway, so once you start wondering, especially in the moment, am I praying hard enough? Then the answer is no, right? Focus on the task in front of you. That is your calling at the moment. That's your holy duty, your sacred task, right? And if you're doing that to the best of your ability, and if you're concentrating on that with all of your heart and your soul and your mind and your whole being, and your spirit is all in that, then you don't need to worry about the rest of that stuff. But I agree, it is a sacrifice. And that's something that, I'll very quickly tell this anecdote about being at Holy Cross Chapel, because I had the privilege of chanting across from then Menos Karanos on Sundays. And I would lead the left choir, and the left choir was basically me, maybe a few seminarians that would hang out there at the school on Sundays, but mostly first-year students. And as soon as it got time for the communion verse, which always falls to the left choir, the Kinonikon, I start chanting Kinonikon, we start chanting it all together, and one by one, these kids started dropping away from the analogion so that they could pull out their prayer books and say their communion prayers. And God forgive me, I started grabbing them by the scruff of the neck and bringing them back to the analogion. Excuse me, we have a job to do. You don't think I want to say the communion prayers? I would love to be able to stop chanting right now, pull out my prayer book and say the communion prayers. If you want to say those, say them before you come to church. Otherwise, do your job, right? And if you're doing your job, and again, if you're doing it with your whole being, then you don't need to worry about that. All right.
An anecdote on a similar, on a similar plane. That I had an experience where I was directing the choir at a parish, and for some reason there was a kind of a bad habit that started slipping in, where nobody in the choir wanted to watch me during the consecration. They wanted to watch the altar, and which meant we weren't together on their responses. They were sounding bad. They were drawing attention to themselves in the worst possible way. This is the temptation of getting too far away from performance. Getting too into the idea that performance doesn't matter. And there was a rehearsal where I had to say, look at me during the consecration. Don't look at the altar. You need to watch me. You need to watch me for your cues, when to come in, when to sing, when to cut off. Otherwise, you are calling attention to yourself in way, you are drawing attention away from the altar at that point, if you are watching the altar. And I had a choir member get up and walk out. That person could not handle being told that. But this is the reality.
Just a tangential remark. I think it was Saint Iakov of Sovevia, the newly canonized, who was asked by, I think, a spiritual daughter of his, Father, I now have kids, and I don't have enough time to pray. I can't go to vigils anymore. I can't spend time in front of the icons and just pray because I have all those things to do. And his response was, your children are your prayer.
Mhm.
They are your vigil. So doing a sacred task that is required of you is what imparts sanctification to you, more than if you decided to know, I'm not going to go change the diaper, I'm just going to go pray. No. So it's the same,
Good luck with that.
it's the same thing when it comes to performing sacred tasks in church.
Tell that to Megan the next time you see her.
Excuse me. I wanted to switch gears to what we talked about towards the end. Oh, thank you, Father. We have a situation in this country where we've bifurcated, how about that, church music? And we say that, we have the chanters who only know how to read in Byzantine chant or sing in Byzantine chant. And they sing the Orthodox, and they're there to help out with the sacraments during the week, funerals, baptisms, weddings, whatever it is. And then we have the choir that only reads Western music or knows Western music, and their role is the liturgy. And then within that, it's like, well, it's the special troparion of the day. Should we let the chanters do that, or should we let the choir do that? Or we don't know that hymn, choir people, we don't know that hymn, so we'll let the chanters do it. All those kinds of things swirl around parishes in our archdiocese. I don't know about others. And even sometimes to the kids. I have a situation in my parish where I've heard a couple of families say to me, where I've been encouraging them to think about their kids just going to the choir and singing with the choir, and they go, oh no, not the choir, only chanting for my child. I was like stunned. So we have this split, and I think sometimes the chanters feel bad because the choirs have taken away the liturgy, all the beautiful things John taught us about. And the choirs feel bad for other reasons, and we have these tensions in churches. Sometimes there are advanced choirs that they share things, but is it ever a true inclusion? Where choir members are actually chanting the Orthodox or doing some of, coming to Vespers. Or chanters are, once they're finished with Orthodox, they come and sing in the choir. So we're really together. So I thought we might comment about that kind of, how do we practically bring all this stuff together to create something new in our parishes? And instead of going to the panel first, I'll go to you.
I was going to say, can we just do either a Western style church or a Byzantine style church? Why do we need the separation where when someone walks into Orthodox, they have two chanters and they listen to chanting, and then liturgy starts and they have the organ and the choir? Why can't we either do a Byzantine choir? Like a lot of the old rules in patriarchal cathedrals don't have a Byzantine choir. Why can't we even do a Byzantine choir that can do both Orthodox and the liturgy?
In the Byzantine style.
The Byzantine style. So it's still a choir, a group of people singing poorly, but all in the Byzantine style. Why do we have to have this separation where liturgy is for
A Western sound.
or just do both, Orthodox in the Western style and liturgy in the Western style instead of
Okay.
separating them?
Let's add that to the mix, to what I said, and it's the whole thing. It's a good question. So who would like to start?
I can say.
Okay.
So we already have that in our parish. We have the Byzantine choir and the liturgical choir, but there are many people that are in both. And so just this last Sunday when I was leading Orthros, look up at the choir director was motioning down, come up because no one else is here. We need you to come up and sing. So we already have that. Anybody else?
And how did you accomplish that? How did that happen?
I think I don't know, it's basically, people, we know, for me, when I came back to Pittsburgh, at first I wasn't going to sing in the liturgical choir because I was, I don't remember if it was because of my young children or just felt like it was too much. But after about a year, I realized that I was needed there, and so I decided I needed to go back. And so I think that's the case for most of the people. We know we're needed in both places, and so we do what we feel that we should.
Go ahead.
There's a lot of history behind this issue, especially in this country, right? But not only in this country. My late beloved teacher, Liturgical, when he first started at St. Irene's Church on Iolu Street in Athens, they had Orthodox, liturgy, and second liturgy. And the second liturgy was sung by a Western-style choir that did the music of Sakylaridis in three-part harmony. Why? Because that was Sakylaridis' church. That used to be the old Metropolitan Cathedral of Athens. Okay, and not only because of that, but even back in the 1970s, this wasn't uncommon to have this this practice in Greece. And so it's something that slowly fell out of use in Greece. Here, what you have is and I basically have to give you the thumbnail sketch of the history of how we ended up with this situation. But the first immigrants to the United States from Greece specifically, the music of Sakylaridis harmonized was what was going on in Greece at the time. And so they brought that here with them, and that was what you sang in liturgy. And then that was developed by our let's say, chorale of Greek-American composers, some of whom are absolutely brilliant, and some of whom aren't, just like anything else. And there was a mentality as recent as, let's say, 20 years ago, among many clergy, and if you look at the way churches were designed, maybe not 20 years ago, 30 and 40 years ago, if you look at the way churches were designed, virtually no concession for chanters whatsoever. Because the idea was that Byzantine music is dying out, nobody's going to be doing Orthodox in 10 years anyway, focus on the liturgy, the choir, and that's where the real life of the parish is. And Richard has written about this as well, the idea of having a Western-style choir with an organ was a sign of
Acculturation.
Well, acculturation on the one hand, but it was a sign of being rich, right? This is what the rich wasps down the street have in the Episcopal Church, and we have it just as much, right? It really was a sign of we're just as well off as they are.
We made it.
Right? We made it, exactly. And so there are a lot of cultural currents flowing underneath this issue. And none of them can be discounted. They're all real, and they all make a big difference. I don't want to take up too much time talking about this particular issue, but it's a very important discussion. I'll cut to the chase, which is, in my programs, I just erase the dividing line. And we are one group of singers, and Richard's done the same thing with his program as well. It's one group of singers. It starts from the beginning of Orthodox and sings to the end of liturgy. Now, some people may show up later and come just to liturgy, but it's still the same group of people singing from the same place. And there isn't this back and forth, okay, who's going to sing this? Are you going to sing it? Am I going to sing whatever? So that's one answer. The other answer is, if it is true that and we've seen that this is true from all of us being here, that there has been a revitalization of the chanter stand, and you're wondering, but you still want to maintain the choir, let's say, from the choir loft in that style, then perhaps you treat them really, truly as two choirs and apply the order of the double choir setup that is traditional and appropriate to Greek Orthodox liturgy. There are all kinds of solutions and approaches one can take to get to a place where we truly are one community, as Richard was talking about. But honestly, step one is to stop thinking about it as two different groups of people, because we're all we're fulfilling the same liturgical function.
Two thoughts here. One, just on the point of the sense of having arrived. So I'm a convert, and I am at a fairly heavily Greek parish in Boston. And I had one of my choir members tell me at some point ago, 30 or 40 years ago, this church was really really heavily Americanized. We sang all kinds of Christmas carols at Christmas, and we had our stained glass windows, and we did this. We were just very, very American. Your family would have felt very welcome here. Never mind the fact that we already feel very welcome there. But and I just asked this person, and what language was your liturgy in? Greek. Okay, so how Americanized was that? But one thing I want to point out in terms of this table, in terms of a synthesis, as it were, of what's going on with the analogion and what's going on with the choir loft. So how many people at this table, in terms of panelists, read Byzantine notation? And how many of us read Western notation? Yeah. So that divide, the notational divide itself, is going away because you have an increasing number of people who do both, and who are familiar with both traditions and who can kind of go back and forth, and that I think some of that I think is going to be what helps bring those traditions more closely together.
Have things in both notations.
Yes.
And then there are the people on both Chanters stand and the choir loft who read neither. They learn by rote.
In which case it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. That's the reality of what, I think in my choir, we have 10, only 2 can read music. And the rest are just learning it by rote. Yeah. Any other comments from the floor about this issue? Yes, and then.
My experience, it starts with each group accepting each other first. When I went to Panagia Panda Vasilisa in Kentucky, I'll be honest with you, I was Byzantine, chanting, that's the way it is, and they do their thing and we do our thing. And there were many chanters that, pushed that philosophy, and they weren't accepting of us and we weren't accepting of them. I'm just being honest. I went to Panagia Panda Vasilisa in Lexington, Kentucky. There was one Greek Orthodox church only, and beautiful, wonderful people. And they accepted me and I accepted them. So it started first with the attitude. After a short period of time, they were coming in earlier and they were chanting with me and holding Ishon, and even started to learn. And then after that's the same time, I started joining them in the choir, which was voodoo to see a chanter in the choir. But it was wonderful. Now, it was, what was that?
Vupa.
Yeah. So I think first it starts with the attitude. I no longer felt that they were wrong. They didn't feel that I was wrong, and we started molding together. It was a really nice experience. That starts with attitude first.
You reminded me of another thing too, food. Going out together after liturgy, or sitting at the same table during the fellowship hour, or inviting the chanters to the choir Christmas party. All of those things help to create that attitude. You had a comment too.
I had just a quick comment about the number of choir members I know who would be terrified to not have the organ as a crutch.
Oh, yeah.
Weaning the choir off the organ is a huge obstacle to this. I'd love to hear comments about how you do that. How do you get your choir to leave their Western ear at the door and hear the modes?
One motion, like a Band-Aid, right on.
No, well, one thing that's happened in Buffalo, lack of available organist, no organist. So what are we going to do? Not sing on that Sunday? Yes.
Wasn't the organ originally used to hold the Ishon? I was reading something that when it was originally made.
All right, yeah, this is an interesting question. That is really interesting, you know that. There's an engraving, an old image, an engraving of what the organ looked like the earliest organs looked like. And there were, and you could see the pipes on the back of the organ. And there was the sort of usual sort of, cascade upward and then downward of the pipes. And then 2 or 3 at the end that were much taller than the others. Those pipes could only be used for a drone, because that the frequency is determined by how big the pipe is, and so you couldn't use those melodically. It wouldn't make any sense. Right? It doesn't. So clearly those were drone pipes. So it was part of the music, but we probably got it from the West. Just the practice. I mean, I know this is controversial, so good. Let's get some controversy. I mean, probably it might be that the practice of holding the base of the mode, isokratima, may have come from early Notre Dame polyphony or even earlier in the West. But anyway.
What I read though was it was a Byzantine invention.
The organ was, the organ was, but it was used for imperial ceremonies, not for liturgy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, first of all, I've got to commend everybody on the panel and everybody for being here, because this is absolutely astounding. And Father Anthony, this is absolutely beautiful. I have very poorly been studying Byzantine chant for the last 20 years. I absolutely love it. And what you described about this dichotomy between upstairs and downstairs is troublesome. What you folks are doing, and I'll specifically point at Richard and Amy because I've used ages quite extensively, we're now just starting to scratch the surface on being able to study Greek or English, Byzantine or Western notation, and all follow along in the same music. Just last week, we were with Dimitri, and we were doing a Polyeleos. There was 2 people reading it in Western and 2 people reading it in Byzantine, and we were actually able to chant together. And our goal as a small community is hopefully one piece at a time, because there are people that prefer Western, there are people that prefer Byzantine, but through your efforts, we're able to at least review a piece of music together and come together, and as you've so eloquently and purposefully said, we need to practice outside of the context of the church. And we're able to actually start being able to chant together, whether it's Byzantine or Western, Greek or English. And so I commend you, and I'm so thankful, and God bless your efforts to keep going. The other thing I wanted I'm always a pain in the butt, so forgive me. In this community that I'm familiar with, there are not enough parishes that offer Vespers. There are not enough. Sunday morning is always a rush, and it drives me bonkers. I was on the island of Crete over the summer, and I went to St. Titos in Heraklion. Orthros was 1 hour and 45 minutes, and liturgy was 1 hour. It was the most incredible thing, because Orthros takes a long time to do. And we're confined to, oh no, we gotta start at 10. Well, if we're gonna start at 10, then we need to start Orthros at 8:30. And it's my hope and prayer that we can understand the fullness of the services, not only on Sundays, not only at Orthros, not only at liturgy, but at Vespers and throughout the week. And so continue your efforts, and thank you so much for everything you do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Father Anthony, how much more time do we have?
Go 15 minutes more.
Okay, I wanted to save the last. Let's talk about the future of the church, the future of church music. We've alluded to it, the big changes that have happened, that Richard pointed out, and that we see represented among the speakers. In the availability of resources, the fact that we can sing in Greek or English or Byzantine notation and Western. Even beyond that, the growing use of tablets, congregational people looking at their smartphones and following the liturgy instead of the pew book. Where are we going with technology, with this coming together of our traditions in this country? What are some things that sort of strike home to you about what's next for us? What's the road to the future that's going to bring clergy, choirs, chanters, congregations together in creating a beautiful, worshipful experience? So any thoughts about that? Big one. And we can just, I'll start you off. I mentioned it to Richard at lunch. When Father Seraphim Dides first began conceiving of ages, he was writing music and had these ideas, and he called a sort of like not a formal advisory board, but he invited some people to come to St. Gregory Palamas Monastery. John happened to be there, I happened to be there, and he started showing, this was maybe, 15, 20 years ago? I don't know,
At least
a long
15.
time ago.
At least 15
He
years.
started showing us some of the things that he was thinking about. And we were excited, and we talked about, wow, this could be very helpful for this, that, and the other thing. And then he said, he said, what do you think about this? He said, because we must have been starting to use tablets, or there was some use of technology.
He used a tablet at the monastery.
At the monastery, yeah, that was maybe the first time
There were
we
no
saw it.
tablets, flat screen computer. It was
Yeah. And then he
touch-
said, now this is the
touch-
future,
touch-
he said,
yeah.
what do you think if we had some super text, like they do at the operas? The super text of the whole liturgy. Do you think maybe that would help the congregation to participate more? So that's he hasn't gotten there yet. I don't know if he's even thinking of it, but
We're not.
we're not. But anyhow, that's the next and last topic of our panel discussion. We've got technology. This whole thing is live streamed. Parishes are live streaming their liturgy. People, John, don't even have to come to liturgy anymore. They can supposedly, can they engage in corporate worship at home?
You can't receive
No.
communion at home.
Yeah, that's true. Anyhow, who's next?
Leonidas has a
Somebody back
comment,
there.
or-
Can you come closer, because I can't repeat everything that you say in a longer way.
I just wanted to know what the panel's opinion or position is on the decision. I don't know if it's the Synod of the Ecumenical Patriarchate or the Patriarch himself
the Synod.
the Synod, who issued an encyclical against the use of tablets.
Oh, really?
And against the use of tablets.
Well, let's hear from Sarah. We haven't heard from her too much.
All
And then
right.
let's hear from Richard, who I think has strong opinions on the matter.
Yes, and we will then get the two ends of the spectrum by asking me and Richard. At my chant stand, we use books. Mostly, we use books that have text. We mostly use the Vicki, and we use the Meneon and the Engolpion for papatic things, for things that we are, for long Glyphistica, that sort of thing. We will use scores in books. And that's how we work. That's how it works for the people who are at my chant stand. And I must say that on the times that we have used electronic media, I haven't been so satisfied with the results. I'm quite aware that this is a personal decision. This is happening because of personal decisions on our parts. And I'm quite willing to chalk it up to local variation in the church. However, my personal experience has been that chanting a liturgy, chanting an orthros perhaps even more, from the books means a kind of engagement with the service that is not possible if you are not working entirely from books. So.
question, actually. So we used to use books, and we've had a Byzantine choir for about 11 years, I would guess. And that can sometimes be 8 to 10 people, and when we were using books, it was hard for everyone to see. So this past Holy Week, we had 2 iPad Pros, and it was very helpful. And so after that, our protosaltes decided to buy 2 for the parish. And I would say that in our parish, we do not chant in Greek at all. So it's all English, a little bit of Arabic, and we just don't have a lot of books in English. So to use books, it's books that we make, which are three-ring binders. And you know, music is changing so often that for us using tablets, big tablets, I should clarify, because that did make a substantial difference. We used to use, you know, like an 8-inch or 7-inch sometimes, and that was not very easy to read from. But once we switched to the larger size tablet, it's made being able to see much better. And when we have a large choir, we'll set up 3 tablets all around the analogion, and it's very nice. The sound is very nice. In the past, sometimes it was like all the Isan were behind me and I couldn't hear myself chant. So it's very nice to have this like U shape with everyone able to see the music. And we couldn't do 3 binders on our analogion because it's the kind that turns, but it doesn't have the book holder. It has, you know, the little triangle. So we could have only done 2 books, and that would not work. So tablets for us have been a very good change.
Ages, baby.
Right. So as the executive director of Ages, I obviously have a professional opinion in the state in all of this. But I'm a pragmatist at heart where this is concerned. I love books. Nobody can step foot in my house and deny that, much to my wife's annoyance. But for Greek, yes, absolutely, love books. I have a Greek for any given Sunday Orthros. I have a Greek Anastasimatarion sitting on my analogion. I have Musiki Kypseli. I have the Pandekti and so on. Now, for English, however, that becomes a separate question. Okay, English books. What English books are you referring to? Okay, yes, there's the HTM Mineon. My bishop does not prefer the use of that I'm aware of. You know, what books are we supposed to use? And then you also have the question of stability of translation, right? So if you have a text that is going to be revised or could be revised on a moment's notice, you know, thus overwriting the book that you have bought, how is that supposed to work? So for English, I chant from a tablet strictly as a matter of practicality. I have an iPad Pro that sits on top of my Anastasimatarion, and you know, that's in terms of just being able to get through a Sunday. As far as I'm concerned, it's a practical necessity. And until we actually have a complete set of books that we're told, use these, you know, I'm not sure what the other option is. You know, printing out services and scores week after week after week seems like an awful waste for things that are going to get tossed at the end of every service. So, you know, it's, I would love to use, and then it's also a space consideration for me as well. If I have to have, you know, I don't have an analogion where I can have, you know, two Mineon volumes, one in Greek, one in English. You know, this is this starts to be the redundancy involved starts to become absurd. So you know, from a practical standpoint, you know, if the rule is books alone, you know,
show me how we're supposed to make that work, because I can't see how I'm supposed to make that work in my circumstances.
The way I like to see this is in terms of akrivia and economia. There's the exactness and the economia, right? The sort of loosening of the rules, dispensation. Ideally, we should be using books for aesthetic reasons, for many reasons. Primarily because an electronic device usually is not dedicated to a sacred task. It's not a sacred object. It can be, but usually it's not. Also, there's distractions, right? I mean, while you're reading Edoxastikon, maybe a message will pop up. Right? That's something you always avoid when you use a liturgical book. But, say you have to do liturgy in a remote place and you cannot find the prosophoron. Can you use regular bread? That's what they do in Africa. They imagine the seal. They imagine the particles of the saints. Okay? So if there is no other way to perform a service, then yes, use a tablet. That's my opinion.
Can someone talk a little bit more about the restriction? That's the first time I've heard about this restriction, and where did it originate? Was it from the Synod, from the Metropolitan?
It was a patriarchal encyclical back in July, I believe, addressed to the Metropolitan of Imbros. There was an incident that happened on the island of Imbros. There was a divine liturgy, and then I think the tablet broke down, and they could not finish the liturgy. So that's what prompted it. But essentially, the encyclical says that for both traditional reasons and because it can be a source of distractions, and also electronic devices are not dedicated to that sacred task, we should only be using books. And it actually refers not only to the chant stand, but to the altar, I believe. So priests also only using books.
Just a brief comment with that using of a hand phone, let's say, for I like to use the Aegis products regularly, and I have my tablet at the Analogian as well as books. And when people come into Orthros, sometimes I have seen a couple people use their hand phone, but now the more I think about it, especially since I went to Greece and was chastised for using my tablet in the church, I think, okay, maybe I'm creating a scandal here. If I recommend to somebody that, look, you can go to the Sage's website, you'll have the entire Orthros here exactly how we're going to chant it. Then, as they use that in their liturgy as well, and other people come and they see people looking at their cell phone during the liturgy, those people might be scandalized as to, is that person reading a text message and responding to that during the liturgy? So that's, I think, a challenge.
Yeah, that's also an important consideration. Local reality and pastoral, concerns, yes. I mean, it's different. In a monastery, they will probably be overly scandalized if you do that, so don't do it. If it's a parish that has been using electronic devices for the past 20 years, then by all means. Stan?
Yeah, I would just like to mention that, it's fine to talk about books versus the tablet and everything like that. It's a practical matter. But of course, books had never been invented, or paper and ink had never been invented. And, seems to me to take advantage of what's been invented in the best way that you can, so that it's going to get even better and better. It's going to get to the point where you actually are holding a piece of paper and it's electronic. But I started newbiz.org 20 years ago almost, and the whole point of it was not electronic versus print, because originally we just expected people to print it out. The whole point of it was the internet and the ability to publish without having to go to some, printing press, to be able to share things. People from all over the world contact me. So we use your materials, blah, 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 blah. But that warms my heart because it's a matter of communication. we can never get away from using ages or New Biz or whoever else is out there. We can never get away from that now because this is our world now. Our world now is electronic, digitized. You know, yeah, Wi-Fi. It doesn't mean you can't print out the ages or whatever. You can print it out on paper if you want to have paper. If you want to have a book, put it in a binder. You can do that. But the whole idea is the communication, the education, the diffusion of having these materials here. You know, I mean, I started ours when the internet was, you know, people didn't even have computers. But I thought, geez, I've got all these nice English translations and stuff. Wouldn't it be nice to share them? So instead of putting them in envelopes and mailing them out to everybody in the world, you just put them up on the internet and they're available for everyone. And I think that's the main important thing when we talk about technology and digitization. It's the diffusion and the ability to bring everybody together. You know, I've had such wonderful conversations with people in different parts of the world about common liturgy and worship. And that's the wonderful thing about it. And I'm sure we're going to iron out all these other.
I think one quick comment on this whole issue of using technology in liturgy. Everything we use is technology. I don't know if that point was made while I was taking care of the fact that I drank too much coffee. But everything we use is technology. The book, the Codex, was a technological advancement over the scroll. And I'm sure it was scandalous when that happened. You know, how dare they not know how to navigate a scroll correctly there, and so they have to rely on the Codex. But whatever you're using, I think the point is you use it responsibly, and you make sure that you have plenty of battery life. You make sure you have all the texts and scores downloaded that you need. You make sure that you're on Do Not Disturb, so you don't get you know, notifications from the messaging apps or whatever. Often I've heard, you know, people insist that whatever tablet or whatever you're going to use in liturgy only be used for that purpose. And my answer to that is, I would love to if I could afford it. But whatever we use, I think, and you run into problems with books too. I've been in the middle of a service reading from a chant book or a liturgical book. I turn the page isn't there. Then what do you do? Or I've been in the middle of service and half the book suddenly falls out of the binding, right? Things happen like this, and I think the point is just to understand that you address them as responsibly as possible. And I think it's important not to be reactive on that. And in general, with this business of people following along on their smartphones or tablets or whatever in services, I think I'm of two minds about this. On the one hand, I think it's great that we have the resources that we do have, and largely thanks to Aegis, that people can do that and follow along. But on the other hand, I really think it's important for people to start learning how to listen, and for the people singing the texts, chanting the texts, to learn how to enunciate so that people can listen. And a lot of that is tied also into acoustics. Build churches with good acoustics so that people can hear it, hear the liturgy. Because otherwise, what's the point? But because, and I'll quote my late spiritual father, Father Ephraim Lash, and he was the first person to point this out to me. Our liturgical texts were not meant to be read. They were meant to be heard. They are spoken or sung word. So if those of us who do the work in liturgy, chanting, reading, clergy, etc., we have to read these words, so that we make sure that we say them correctly. But the majority of the people in liturgy are hearing them. And that liturgy is meant to be an acoustic experience, not a reading experience, because you can read that stuff at home. Anyway,
Θα πάω να ακούσω τη λειτουργία is the Greek saying, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Ακούω τη λειτουργία, hear the liturgy.
Vic, can I make a comment?
Yeah, one last comment.
Okay.
Is it?
The Coptic community in Rhode Island has built a beautiful, a huge, gorgeous church in Situate, Rhode Island. They have beautiful icons. Have you been there?
No,
It's just gorgeous, gorgeous church. But they have 6 or 8 big screen TVs hanging down from the ceiling in different places. And they have the liturgy in English, in what they think is Greek, which is really a weird font, but it's a Coptic thing, and then in Arabic. And, well, no, they think it's Greek, but it's a really odd font if you read Greek. The colors on the words change. It's like you're karaoke, and it's really distracting. I mean, you can follow along with everything that's being said in whatever language you want, but it's jarring to see these things side by side with the icons, and they're a little distracting.
New version of the spin.
Yeah, exactly.
Even the text can distract us from
Yes.
being in union with God. Anything can be a distraction when done poorly.
I think we probably should.
Maybe
There
one
was
final
one more, Father, yeah.
Sorry, Father. Just one last thing, and I don't really mean to bring this up as a necessary evil, but I have a fear of microphones. And being in a group as part of blending, as you mentioned earlier, Richard, I find that blending is distracted more when a microphone is pointed at me because I'm not focused on the group. But as you also mentioned, having acoustics being a necessity of the church, sometimes the church kind of absorbs the sound that you're creating as a group, so microphones are necessary. What is your advice on strategy for their use, and is there a way to situate them such that the group is highlighted and not necessarily individuals?
That's actually a big answer.
Yeah.
Private answer.
Hire a
My
professional to do your
hesitation is
sound
we need the
system.
next hour and a half to work on some of that.
Right.
It's a great question, and I think we should answer it offline, unfortunately, because we gotta, yeah.
Yeah.
keep going.
Okay.
Not
Thank you,
to
Vicki.
cut this off, because I think we could talk for quite a long time. What I'd like to do now, this will conclude the panel discussions.